So it's safe to say it's been a while. It's been about what, like 3 months. And so this is a quick update video on where I've been and where we're going with the channel. And a little quick teaser into some of the ideas I've been working on for the last few months. So the first big update is that, as many of you know, if you go back to my older videos, I still am, but by the time you see this, who knows, maybe was a high school student. I'm now going to be proudly attending Harvard University for political science and economics. That's pretty great, right? And so I allowed myself a little bit of respite since around March or so when I made my last video. And I've been kind of spending that time to not only just, I guess, relax from the long grind, but also to really think about more ideas on a deeper level, take it slower by slower, and try to see what information I could absorb. The most recent thing I really even two things I've been thinking about, which I've already really talked about before, and this will be quick, so bear with me here, right? Is the first one is regarding one of my first videos, which is, I believe, modern educational standards and their logical inevitabilities or conclusions, right? Something along those lines. And I want to maintain that idea. I really stand by that idea. So like a quick synopsis, of course, which you can check out yourself on this channel itself, is basically this whole idea of everyone needs to be educated wouldn't work simply for the reason that not everyone can be an educated worker, because then again, who would do the quote unquote dirty work? And then the issue politically becomes that if you want to say everyone should be educated, which is a progressive left wing ideal, in a certain more so, I guess when it comes to like funding and such, right? If you want that as your end goal, then you also have to be like, okay, where are we going to export this labor off to? Is it going to be, like illegal immigrants? Are we exporting labor off to sweatshops in Vietnam or China? And that was like the kind of idea and parody I wanted to go with. And I really came across this in the last week or so, but I feel like I didn't have I took one side or one angle of that issue, but I failed to kind of acknowledge some of the other parts of it, which actually had larger societal implications. And that would be in the form of I might have brought up like Ages of Discord and Peter Turchin before, but something called elite overproduction, which is a term coined by Oxford research professor Peter Turchin and writer and biologist actually, and it basically said that of across many of the revolutions and societies across history, one consistent trend throughout many of them and their actual impetus, or not impetus rather, it's actually the one thing he doesn't actually include, but one of the preconditions set for a lot of these revolutions is that there's a disconnect between the amount of educated or always trouble with that, scholarly elites, the amount of them versus how many spots are actually available, right? For example, if you like overproduce lawyers, because of the prestige and the idea that lawyers is a good profession over the last like 20 years, really, like starting in the 2000s, really is when it started. And by the way, Turton said that the actual consequences of such wouldn't appear till like 2020, 2030, one generation apart. That being said, once you overproduce that amount of that elite for a certain class, whether it be through simply wealthy bloodborne elites or educational elites or capital elites, right? Capitalist or landowning elites. If there's not enough spaces for them to fill, a lot of them will feel left out, and therefore there will be a significant cost for revolution or just societal malaise in general as discontent grows among the people who aren't going to get those jobs. And you're always already seeing that a little bit in Gen Z, and what is the essence of that? And that's what you see in all these posts and people who, maybe English degree isn't a great example, right? But people who get these CS degrees, anthropology degrees, which are noble intellectual pursuits, and there's nowhere for them to go, even though they've been provided with these ideas that a college degree is your path to, elitehood or research or some idea, some area within academia, which would lend you some sort of power, privilege, or responsibility, which humans naturally seek when it comes to our competitive nature. And I guess the kind of twin idea is I was touching upon is that there will be general malaise in society for the reasons I initially stated, which is that you're not going to be able to actually fill the positions. However, I guess my level of thinking was um malinformed, but also I just didn't have the actually like frame of thinking that Peter Turchin actually was able to come up with this whole idea of elite overproduction. and something with Rob K. Henderson recently I saw as well. But the very fact that I think I was able to build on this idea is kind of cool because I get to look back, see this idea which I held as one of my foundational principles when it came to founding this channel, and then I get to see it develop and I have the ability to look back at what I thought and what I was thinking, and now I'm able to actually reflect upon that pretty well. The second thing I've been thinking about a lot more is as I'm going to be participating in the ROTC, which is the Reserve Officers Training Commission, core. I always figure out on that. ROTC. So I will be joining the military in some way or fashion in the end of my collegiate career. So in 4.5 years, basically. And it made me think about a lot because today's Memorial Day, or I guess yesterday was because it's 12 a.m. right now. But 1984 has always stuck with me because of the way people view it. Not like the book itself. Book is fine, decent message, terrible plot, right? We've all heard these things about the film, or what the hell am I saying? Well, I guess it is a film, but also like the book itself. And it always struck me is the dialogue surrounding it, which is this idea of obviously you have the themes of good versus evil, but also power structures, totalitarianism, and the dangers of just the states basically, and privacy is one of the bigger themes as well, motifs as well, right? And the way people approach it a lot of times is that we compare any sort of state surveillance and such as 1984, and state surveillance, any sort of power dynamics, any sort of hierarchy. 1984 is very it creates a visceral reaction in the collective zeitgeist when it comes to what we understand about media and literature, sorry. And therefore, a lot of people, when they hear 1984, we assume this sort of dark dystopian idea, which a lot of us grew up with, especially my generation, and we all have this sort of fear of these sort of totalitarian, overpowering ideologies, or even these sort of states, which kind of serve as like the fuel for discontent within the protagonist. And that's the point I want to really get to, which I've been thinking about more and more, which is that it's the protagonist who feels that way. And again, though the narrator may not be omniscient, the author is, right? Like the real human behind the story. And so when George Orwell writes about the states of, what? Oh, I almost said Pan Am. Oh my God, I'm cooked. Um, the one in England. I I'm like East Asia and Oceania. I forget what like the one Winston's from is called for some reason. Eurasia. Yeah, Eurasia. That sounds about right. Ingsoc. Right, right. That's the English socialism. Anyways, the point I was trying to make is that because it's Orwell writing it and he's trying to make a caricature of what these sort what that would look what a surveillance state would look like basically at that point, we fail to understand that there are other ways than what's actually predicted in 1984 for governments, companies, any larger powerful institutions to actually carry out the things that they want to get done, which is depicted in 1984. And the important part is perspective that where I guess it's fortunate enough for Winston that he somehow retains these memories of before the revolution, and therefore he has all these internal conflicts, which the book thoroughly explores in some ways, and some fashions it doesn't, right? And that's what I find interesting because the idea of being in the world of 1984, not in the world without the omniscience of George Orwell or the narrator, I suppose, without the wherewithal or knowledge of Winston, who are you in that story? Who are you in 1984 in the world of 1984? And the answer is nobody, right? You are a nobody and you are completely biased to the system. You find nothing wrong because of the little things they do to actually convince you of the little truths. And you have all these things within probably Eurasia, but like the entire world in 1984 and all these different larger governments, which is, lying to the populace using the media, erasure of history, re-envisioning history or revisionist history, I guess, right? And all of these different things that we can see clearly as being negatives and very being obvious that it's being done. However, if you were completely, at the control or at the will of that system, would you even see that happening? And you have all these ideas like, hate week, and it's like so obvious that bad things are happening, right? Like, oh, we find it silly, a caricature. Oh, it'd be so obvious. We could prevent 1984 by just saying no to one entire week of yelling at a computer screen, right? Which many of us probably do, honestly, like especially the most terminally online of us. Terminally online of us. However, would that really manifest in that obvious manner? No, it would not. Especially because many people have read 1984, and the real world governments are not caricatures; they are the real thing, and therefore, any sort of covert operation being done to our own people or to the world at large would not be visible in that sense. It would not be something obvious like that. And that's what got me thinking. So like when you're thinking about like especially I think as a military person, and being around military people, the biggest question is what is honor and is there actually honor in death for an end that is not noble, right? Because a lot of people say like Vietnam was not Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, pointless wars, millions dead. That hundreds of thousands dead. I don't know if we crossed into millions in Vietnam. Maybe we did. Um well, I guess the casualties, it's many millions over all the wars, but the point is that the way I think a lot of the programming is, and the way the subtleties of how people speak about, sacrifice and honor, it's just one small, I guess, micro little view into how if we truly live, and the thing is, like, these are small. Like, I still think there is nobility and such in sacrifice. However, these small little things that are brought up in conversation that are just understood as social norm, the methods of questioning it is, dubious at best because you don't know if whether or not you're actually within the system. And that's the point I'm trying to get at. If you were to live in a truly totalitarian state, that idea itself of living in a totalitarian state is inconceivable because the state is all you would ever know, that you would ever need to know, and it is all that would ever be told to you. And so you would never know that there was anything wrong with Ingsocism or, the life you live within 1984 should that have been your entire reality for all time. So isn't that weird, right? So let's take that to the real world. How would we ever know if we're being lied to? And the answer is we'd never know, and the methods of doing so are extremely dubious. Even look at the story of 1984. Winston thought he was in the revolution with that, like, forget his name, man. It's like an H or L name. The guy who looked at him funny, and then he basically pretended he was a upper party member, but basically LARP or faked as a revolutionary to get Winston captured and basically kill him to submission. There is such a thing as controlled opposition, is what I'm trying to say, and that how do you really know if you're ever on the right side of a story or if you have all the information fully? And the answer is you really don't know. You might not. Because in either interpretation of reality, either reality is what it seems, or reality is what it seems, and they have no actual way of breaking through it. Because in a true totalitarian, truly all-encompassing society, which may or may not have been possible at this point, and all of this even might be just like a controlled thought where I'm not breaking through to that next layer of understanding, right? At that point, if you're just an NPC, if you're just like a non-protagonist character, right, or non-playable character within 1984, reality is just as it seems, and that is what we must accept. And that is also an equally terrifying thought, where every idea you've had, every idea you've been thought to have, and you've been told to have, or if you've even been socialized to have, what does it all mean, and what is it, and what goal is it ending towards? And part of me wonders whether or not like the elites actually understand history in the same way a lot of historians do. Because the thing I was thinking about recently is that how like educational standards are dipping. We mentioned this just a few months ago, maybe it was a year ago, in the video regarding Generation Alpha and how they're basically cooked, right? Um, and the educational standards are dipping. And obviously, as with any point in history, the self-interested elite are mostly, if anything else, interested in their own self-preservation, their advancement, and the advancement of their descendants, right? I feel like nowadays they're trying to like ascend to like superhuman, but I digress. But that if you carry that idea now, could it be that the poor economic policies and decisions are by design such that they don't want to manufacture as many elites because they realize that up until the year about 2000, they've been over manufacturing elites, leading to this kind of discontent society, and they're trying to like roll that back now by not like creating cattle, but by removing the power, limiting the elite class to people with access to it, and by removing power and the actual wherewithal for revolution from the people who might be influenced to do so. Because remember, revolutions are not caused by the people; it's caused by, as all these theories say, people who have been rejected by society or people who want to actually change it so they can come to the top at the end. Not necessarily for the betterment of the people. Even just look at the way Lenin and Robespierre conducted the French, the Russian and French revolutions, respectively. In neither case did it actually end with fairness or goodness for the people, even, a century afterwards without the intervention of some foreign power. And that ultimately is the reality that we live in when it comes to, the elites, which is where, I don't know if I'll be entering that sphere or if anyone else I know, or if I'm already in that sphere, right? Because of this privileged life. Or maybe it's not privileged. Who knows? Like, what really is perspective now when you take that some people are never destined to win. Anyways, the point of all of this is that it's a scary thought that you'll never know whether or not you're in a totalitarian state, because that is the paradox. You'll never know the reality beyond what you can know and beyond what is measurable. For example, if we never had ears, sound would be but a foregone conclusion. It would not be something that, well, I guess the opposite of a foregone conclusion is. How do you even use that word? I gotta search that up. But I just gotta look it up real quick. Yeah, it's obvious. No, so it's the obvious opposite of a foregone conclusion, where it's unclear whether or not something would exist or not. And that is kind of, well, I guess a good way to put it is that something you won't know. There's stuff beyond our understanding where even knowledge itself cannot fix. For example, in a world full of gay people, being straight would make no sense. That's a terrible example, of course, and the same would go vice versa. In any sort of idea where there is just sort of like duality between two ideas, where one is inaccessible and two are by nature mutually exclusive, right? Um, in a world where we had no hands, writing. Wait, no, that doesn't make sense. I guess like my example was actually pretty good, I guess. Um, well, you can, and like, okay, yeah, in a world where everyone was like, I don't know, like female or something, the idea of being male would be, absolutely just beyond recognition. Why would you ever come up with this kind of biology, right? Um, and that inability to look beyond what you know is a built-in limitation of either um reality or a reality fabricated by a larger power. And that is the subject of that contemplation. But anyways, those are the two things I wanted to kind of say I was working on. Um, I have some other essays I've been trying to write down a little bit. And motivation's been hard, being a senior in second semester and such. But I have some other stuff cooking up when it comes to like views on the meaning of life, which is kind of deep, I guess. But the ultimate idea is centers around fiction, and the idea is basically, I'm like testing it out still, is that we don't question, a lot of us question our meaning in the world, right, the universe, or even our own lives. However, something that we never question, that we take for granted, I guess people might have taken for granted with like high religiosity back in the day, is stories, right? When we read a story, when we read 1984, it seems almost a foregone conclusion, right? Seems obvious that the protagonist is important because they're the protagonist, right? So everything that happens must have a purpose, and everything must be valuable, and it's even more so in movies because you get to actually get more sensory detail and less to your imagination about the inherent purposeness or um, the inherent purpose a character has, because we never question, oh, what is the meaning of this character in the terms of in the same metaphysical sense that we imagine ourselves, right? It's not like I don't mean like what impact did they have on the story. Does this character matter? And the question answer is always yes, or maybe not yes, because that's a question that's never really answered, because it's not really a necessary question to ask, because by the nature of storycraft, everything that you say is designed with purpose. And so my both recommendation or my advice or my remedy, I guess, for the situation is that you should view your own life as a story. And so when a lot of people have that, like it's people say it's a bad thing, like, oh, you're not the main character, you're not the main character. I'm like really thinking, is that such a bad thing to be the main character? Not in like a narcissistic way, of course, but to imagine yourself as inherently important to the story of yourself. And there's a lot of ways to augment that to live your life. One thing I've tried to implement is like, okay, so I mean, basic 101, not even like a filmmaking idea or like general storytelling idea. But it's just even when it comes to viewership and enjoyment of media, which is that perhaps we should enjoy the entire sensory experience, which means not only the visuals but also the music, you can search up videos about it. It's a huge informer of how we interpret scenes and how we interpret both the tone and mood of I guess how we interpret the tone of a certain movie. And it is on the director to actually get some good music or soundtrack to actually supplement all the other directional choices they make within a film. And so one of the things I've been trying to implement, as I was saying, is that start each morning with with music. The second you wake up, it should be right there. Alarm off, bang, music on. Sort of like an intro, right? Intro to your day. And it's corny, yeah, I know, but I feel like that's much better in not only getting a good mood up, but it makes it feel like you're doing things with purpose, right? Like almost like you're in a montage. And obviously this won't solve like the deepest underlying questions of the universe and such, but I find it perfectly reasonable and kind of serviceable when it comes to actually getting yourself out of bed every day, and when it comes to moving on and trying to find purpose within your life, right? Because meaning of life is kind of different from purpose, and purpose is really easy to find when you imagine yourself as in a story. If you want to see yourself somewhere, right, design yourself a plot how you're going to get there. If you're if you've had all these bad experiences in the past, you're the troubled character who wants to win, X, Y, and Z, who wants to go through this. But you also have to set up, but then you also foresee yourself obstacles. And these are just, arcs in a larger story of your life. And I think that's just kind of a cool way to look at it. And I'm not really sure how perfectly to verbalize it or putting it into writing. But the general idea, I think it has been, formulating in my head for a while, but this has been really more of a life kind of thing. And as I always say, the happy man does not ponder about the meaning of life. Um, that's one of my favorite quotes I've just created. But yep, that being said, I just felt really bad for not uploading for the last like 2.5 months, especially because of how surprisingly well my last video did, right? My God, this is so hot down here. But ultimately, yes, I'm happy where I am right now. I'm very interested in what I'm going to learn, and I do plan on continuing this channel in some way or form with obviously different setting in my, 400-year dorm or whatever the hell I'm going to be trapped in for a few months throughout the next year, basically next year, starting in August, right? But otherwise, I just want to check in. I have not been slacking with the intellectualism, and I think that's one of the strongest things that I've been taking into I've taken into my life, and I want to take forward into my college education, because I am very excited what I want to about the people I'm going to meet, the ideas I'm going to learn, and just hopefully grow my podcast along with it, because I have some ideas I want to share, and you know not enough time sometimes, and not enough people to listen. But hopefully we can get all of that taken care of over the next few months. But hopefully I'll be back next time on discuss nuclear power and kind of some of my own personal goals, because I feel like this is a good place to kind of unwind, reset, begin a new chapter of this channel and my own life in college. So anyways, thank you if you've tuned in this long. I don't know why you would, but thank you for tuning in. This has been the Rhetoric Reviewed. Peace out.